Hello, all. Welcome back to the Brighter Black Futures podcast. I'm your host, Bisa, and today we have another great episode for you. Today, it's all about following up on our discussion from episode 6 about Black children and Black families and autism. And Karyn Robison-Renaud will be joining us again for the interview. And today, what we're going to focus on is Black children in the school system, Black children who are dealing with autism in the school system, and what their parents and families can do to support them well. All right, so let's get into it. And now it's time for the upliftment segment of the podcast, the time when I share a quote that uplifts me and hopefully will uplift all of you, as well as ties into the theme for today. And since we're talking about autism spectrum differences, not disorders, but differences, I want to share a quote that speaks to accepting differences, not just tolerating them, but really accepting them and being open to the idea of you yourself being different or showing up in a different way, and also allowing for other people to do that. And I think the quote that I've chosen is super concise and really great. And it's from a wonderful woman by the name of Ms. Michelle Obama. You might know that name. And it's from her book, Becoming. And the quote is, "There are simply other ways of being." Once again, there are simply other ways of being. And for me, that quote hits because it speaks to the fact that you can change and show up in ways that serve you well at any time, to move from one way of being or one set of habits to another to make sure you're living your best life. And it also, I think, speaks to the idea of all of us being open to the fact that I can do a thing a certain way and somebody else can do a thing a different way, and that's okay. And then the person after that can do it even different from both of us. So if we were all more open to that, and that was the way the world operated, that we're accepting the fact that there are so many different ways of being and it's all okay, wouldn't it be a wonderful place? I dream of that place, and I hope you do too. And I hope you love the quote today. Right now, it's time for the Black History Moment segment. This is a segment where I share some info about Black historical figures, but sometimes, like today, I share some info about a contemporary one, somebody who's doing big things in their field, who is making Black history every day, and that I think you should all know about. And today I picked somebody who is living with autism spectrum difference, who is amazing, and I think little known, at least on this side of the pond, and his name is Stephen Wiltshire. He was born on April 24th, 1974 in London, UK, to West Indian parents. And by the time he was 3, he was diagnosed with autism. He was totally mute. He couldn't communicate with anybody and didn't relate to people well. Luckily, by the time he was about 5 years old, he was enrolled in the Queen's Mill School in London, and his teachers soon discovered that the way he communicated with the world was through his art. Stephen was a masterful artist, and he was fantastic at capturing buildings and cityscapes. His teachers encouraged his penchant for art, and eventually media attention followed. So much so that by the time he was 8 years old, a UK Prime Minister owned a piece of his artwork. Throughout his career as an artist, Stephen has embarked on many world tours to capture cityscapes and landmarks everywhere, and he's also received many commissions and accolades, including being honored as a member of the Order of the British Empire in 2006 for his contributions to the art world. If you're interested in learning more about Stephen Wiltshire and his artwork, be sure to check him out. I'll definitely leave a link to his website in the show notes as well. On to the next segment. I'm here today with somebody you've seen before, Ms. Karyn Robison-Renaud. I think she was here for episode 6 or 7. I can't remember the number, but we talked all about Black children and autism and how their families can be supported in the community. And we didn't really get to touch on a lot about school, which is a big, big topic. So Karyn wanted to come back, and I'm welcoming her back so we can discuss that today. So in case you missed that one, Karyn is a registered social worker who also specializes in supporting families living with autism. And she has lots of experience as a therapist, and she also has a daughter who's on the spectrum. So she knows all the things. So it's going to be a great discussion. Welcome, Karyn.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight the first time, and I love serving the community in this way. So thank you.
All right. We love having you here. So thank you for serving us in this way as well, my audience. All right. So what I want to talk about today, first thing, is to jump back into something we touched on briefly during our discussion last time, and that is what happens with kids when they are young, before they enter school age. So our school age, and can enter the school system. Just to give us a quick recap of what you said about that before we get into the rest of the discussion. So what happens for kids between birth and before they enter the school system for kindergarten? Very quickly.
Okay. So specifically with kids on the spectrum, The hope is that they will get early intervention that will set them up for success once they enter school in JK, kindergarten, or grade 1. Early intervention has been shown in the literature to be incredibly helpful. And the purpose of it, I guess, to break it down more, what early intervention focuses on are what are the skills that some kids learn spontaneously or easily that prepare them for school. What are those skills? And then what is the child on the spectrum missing? So sometimes kids on the spectrum will learn and pick up skills the way other kids will, just in regular life. However, some kids need those skills taught explicitly. And that doesn't need to be seen as a problem or as a deficit or as something to make the child feel like another. It's just a difference in need. And so a good quality early intervention program is not aimed at trying to get rid of the autistic traits. I see it as something that builds on the child's natural abilities and helps the child have a toolbox to draw upon in order to access the school curriculum.
Awesome. Okay, and what are the specific programs available for kids in Ontario where we live? That
So that I can speak on in a limited way because I know what's available in the community that I live and practice in. And they tend to be similar in terms of where you can find them, but I don't know about the quality or the actual content of the program. So what I experienced personally as a mom is that there were a number of options for early intervention. There were paid options, like that where we paid out of pocket as a parent. There were also options that were funded by, I guess, the Ontario government. So we were connected with a resource called, an organization, sorry, called Resources for Exceptional Children. And through that program, they connected us to resources in the community that would provide school readiness. So what I have found professionally is that usually school boards themselves have school readiness programs. So they will have something that your child can attend, usually a year or two before JK. And it tends to be in the mornings, and some programs run Monday to Friday every morning, and some programs are just a few mornings a week. Some are just a few hours a week. But the point is that most school boards have some sort of school readiness prep program where they're teaching the basic skills around sitting in a circle, sharing, fine motor skills, basic counting skills. It might even work on things that you don't think of as school readiness, but are incredibly important for independence, like bathroom care skills and tying up our shoes, or making sure that we have Velcro shoes so that it's a little easier, or slip-on shoes, getting our coat on, getting our backpack on, how to lay out your lunch so that you can eat it and not, spread it all over the place, and you can actually find your lunch containers again and put them back in. So it'll go through those basic things that some families take for granted because either their child was in a daycare setting where those skills were just naturally part of the program, or their kid picked up on it very easily and it wasn't something that they had to focus on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that recap. So, beyond the late diagnosis, which we discussed, affects a lot of children who are racialized and also girls specifically, what are other things or issues that children face in the school system while navigating that space that you've noticed as a professional?
Okay, so what I have found that is that any child that is different, um, is primed to experience difficulties in our school system. And it's not because the child is different. My view is that it's because our institutions have not kept up with the times. And so our institutions were based on the needs of white European children that had a specific presentation. And even those white European children, they weren't homogenous, they weren't all the same. But what history will show us is that children that didn't fit into majority expectations, whether they were white or not, tended to be put to the side. And so those children would sometimes be in a completely different institution. If they were lucky, they would be in the same school, but in a different area of the school, or they just weren't included in the system at all. And so you can imagine that children who are of color, children who have differences in their abilities or in their development, even more so, tend to be seen as a burden on the system versus as we need to broaden our system to include all of our population. So I say all that to say it's not just children of color, it's children of difference that tend to be sidelined. Even today, with all of the improvements that have been made in knowledge, in teaching, in in the theories that inform teaching, like trauma-focused, trauma-informed interventions or trauma-informed classrooms. All of these things are great, but they only scratch the surface of what's actually needed, which is a true commitment to making the curriculum available for our society, not just one segment of it. So that was long-winded, but I think we have to understand that part of it for the next part to be understood well. So the other part that I want to say is that for Black children in particular, and I would say even more so Black boys, there tends to be a lot of stereotypes about why they're acting the way that they're acting. And unfortunately, the stereotype still exists. And if you ask people about it, they won't even know where they got it from. But the stereotype still exists that Black equals bad or wrong or danger. And so when a Black child is experiencing sensory overload, that is going to be seen as just aggressive behavior. I'm not saying it's like this in all schools and with all providers, but unfortunately, this is a theme where the behavior is looked at first. And I did share this in the first podcast, but the underlying issues are looked at much later, if at all. So if a Black child is thrashing around, that child may receive more punitive interventions. I wouldn't even call them interventions, but more punitive reactions versus a white child who might be thrashing around might be seen first as, oh, I wonder what their challenge is, versus why are you behaving like this? And what I noticed in the literature as well, and this is not just with Black children, but it tends to happen more so with them, children with differences, especially differences that are externalized. And so what I mean by that is that you can see the behavior, whereas internalized behaviors, the child is maybe talking about themselves in hurtful ways, but they're not acting out in ways that disrupt the classroom. So with children who have externalized behaviors, the intervention tends to be surveillance instead of how can we respond to this child's behavior? How can we proactively set this child up for success? It tends to be, so this is the norm, and I'm going to keep a watch on you to see if you're able to stay within the norm. And when you step outside of the norm, you're going to get some sort of usually punishment. And that's not what any child needs, any individual needs when they have a difference in ability. They don't need to be monitored for when they step out of line. What they need is, especially in the school system, is an inclusive environment that first is set up to understand them and to support them. And they also need supports in place to help them learn the skills that they might be lacking so that they can be a part of the community in a successful way. But if I'm always being monitored to see when I'm going to step out of line, that doesn't create safety in me, and that makes it very difficult for me to learn.
All right, I love that answer. And I want to go back to girls because I know that we spoke about the fact that girls across the board, all stripes, are often misdiagnosed as well. Do you see
Absolutely.
kind of punitive measure when it's a girl generally, or is it less so? Like, what things might parents who have a girl with autism on the spectrum, sorry, who of whatever racial background see versus a boy, right?
So I find that with this specific issue, it's quite varied. Sadly, I've seen so what I described for Black boys specifically, I've seen that for girls in general. I've had when I've interviewed moms who have girls on the spectrum, um, it's and these were they just happened to be parents of European descent. um, they were describing pretty harsh treatments towards their girls. And it tends to start a little bit differently than it does for Black boys and specifically. So with a Black boy, there tends to be a quick judgment. And that's that softness, that nurturing is typically not quite there in the beginning. There might be lip service to it, but day one, there's like this tension about just waiting for the child to step out of line. There's that feeling. However, with the mothers that I spoke to that have white children, white girls on the spectrum, white daughters on the spectrum, the school system tends to start out trying to be supportive, but when their measures aren't working, they tend to get more punitive. And that's what I heard described to me from a group of moms that I had interviewed, and it was heartbreaking. And so you can see how systemically that issue can come about when teachers are not well supported or well trained, or the supports that are available in the school are so limited that they may as well be non-existent. Of course, people are going to get frustrated. Of course, people are going to get overloaded. But our children should not have to suffer the consequences of a system that wasn't built properly or hasn't kept up with the times. But I've heard stories of where kids that were disrupting the classroom, girls or boys, but if they're disrupting the classroom and there's not enough supports, they're sidelined at best, or they're put in an environment that is hurtful. Like one mom described to me that her daughter was acting out so much and it was misunderstood. She was put in a closet to calm down. And I literally thought I misheard her when I was in the course of this interview, and I said, I'm so sorry. I think I must have misheard you. You're telling me in this day and age that your white child was put in a closet because she was having a meltdown? There's I was so disgusted and also frightened because if that's happening to a white child, good lord. Good lord. Like I can only imagine what is happening to other children, whether they are black, white, or anything in between. But the point is that we do know that children of color are treated differently in the school system. We know that. And so it's frightening.
Deeply, yeah. I'm astounded about the closet thing, but my speaking to and tying back to what you said about people getting frustrated, I also understand teachers are unsupported, and then in that moment, anything could happen, which is scary and uncomfortable on all sides.
Incredibly, incredibly. Because a lot of these kids are still learning ways of communicating effectively. And so it's very difficult for them to advocate for themselves. And I feel like we still have a weird tension between do we believe our children or do we believe the staff? And I don't think it's a binary thing. I think that it needs to be more nuanced. And so, unfortunately, if your child is seen as a problem, and that child finds a way to communicate to you that they felt mistreated, it takes a very uh, I feel, an educated, caring, insightful professional to be able to tease out what's true and what might be a misperception. But what I find is that most professionals don't have that kind of bandwidth because of the pressures on them. And so they tend to either protect the teacher, or they will kindly let the parent know how it's their child's fault that they ended up in that situation.
Ooh, that is a tough position to be in.
Yeah,
What are
yeah.
some early signs that parents should look for that might indicate that their child is not getting the support they need, or maybe even being mistreated within the school system?
So this question, I find we can keep it really simple by just looking at the stress literature.
Okay.
And there's 4 stress responses that any human being, any mammal will have, and that's fight, flight, freeze, and flop. So if you know your child's baseline, and what they look like when they're calm, how they behave when they are starting to come out of that calm place, and then what their behaviors are like when they feel threatened or they're starting to feel like they can't influence their environment. All of that information gives you a baseline. So if you see um, an increase in stress related behaviors, that's a clue that something might not be working in the school environment, especially if it's a dramatic increase, or you're seeing the behaviors are more at school than they are at home. Those are 2 good indicators. Another is when your child is resistant to going to school when they were okay going in the first place. And so I'm not saying that any of these things are direct links to being mistreated, but they are definitely early warning signs that your child does not feel safe at school. It doesn't mean that someone is purposely making them feel unsafe. We have to think of safety in a broader context of, do I feel grounded enough to learn? And it's not always the school's fault, but it is the school's job to figure out what this child needs to access the curriculum. So the common fight behaviors you might see are the external ones, where the child is literally physically aggressive, or they might be verbally aggressive, but you're seeing an increase. So you want to know what the child's baseline is for fight behaviors before you make a judgment. So if you're seeing an increase in the externalized behaviors, um, if you're seeing an increase in internalized behaviors, maybe they're scratching themselves more, they're hitting their head more, they're doing different behaviors that show I am feeling internal stress and I don't know what to do with it. So those are some examples of the fight behaviors. The flight might be literally running away, not able to stay in the classroom, running away before the parent can get the child in the car. And some children will show these behaviors whether they're having difficulties at school or not. And that's why you need to know your child's baseline. Freeze behaviors, when the child just seems to shut down, where they're not trying to interact with people they feel safe with. They seem to just kind of close in on themselves. Or flop, where the child seems excessively fatigued. Maybe they have their head down or covered, or they're sitting in a ball. Like, those are all behaviors that indicate the child is under stress and doesn't know how to regulate. And we want to pay attention to the early warning signs of that. We don't want to wait until they're a massive problem and your child has to be removed from the school repeatedly.
And what would you suggest for some parent out there saying, okay, how do I determine a baseline? Like, how closely do I have to watch for how long?
Sure. So let me make it more practical for parents. So number 1, pay attention to stress behaviors, which can be categorized in those 4 survival responses: fight, flight, freeze, and flop. Second, to your question, you want to know what situations seem to bring out the best in my child. What situations does my child seem to be engaged and happy? And I can't think of other examples, but knowing what those different situations are, and then making some notes about how can you tell that your child is at their best in this situation? Like, are they smiling more? Are they flapping more, but they're smiling and flapping? Are they attending more? Are they more flexible? Are they trying to communicate more? So you do need to observe your child to see what lets you know that they are in a good place, and then you can use that information to help you notice when they start to come out of that place. And you can notice what happens at home, what kinds of things happen at home that bring your child out of that place. And that again gives you the information you need to let the school know, like, this is what I look for to see if something is creating a sense of unsafety in my child. And these are the things I'm going to be looking for when they come home. And it's not in a threat way, it's just to let them know what you know about your child so that they can also watch for early warning signs instead of just waiting until it's a crisis and now we're being very reactive.
So, question for you, because that sounds like a lot. Are have you found that the parents you work with report that when they do that, discuss that with teachers, there's openness to that? Because that sounds like a lot to be.
um so it kind of leads into one of your other questions. I have personally found it depends on the professional that is working with your child. So I personally found that some of the teachers that my daughter had were very open to that information. They were seeking that information. It really felt like a collaborative relationship. However, there were other teachers where it didn't feel like that at all. And it felt like I felt annoying to them. I felt like um I it just didn't feel it. I didn't feel like what I was sharing was seen as useful information. It just felt like I was creating trouble or making their job more complicated. So unfortunately, I find that it depends on the professional that's involved with your child.
So, for parents out there who have a young child who's starting school for the first time, so entering kindergarten or switching a new school, maybe a transition from like junior high to high school, etc., what would you suggest to them for starting to build collaborative relationships with school administrators? And
First thing that I would do is I would ask for a school meeting, and you want to keep that meeting short so that there's not a quick reason to say no. So, and you want to be clear about the purpose of the meeting. And so what I would recommend is saying, my child does a lot better when they're aware of the new situation that they're entering, and they can, sorry, I'm losing my words. I guess what I mean is a lot of people on the spectrum feel a sense of safety with routine and with repetitiveness. And one way to support that is by having a tour of the school or the classroom or both that the child will be primarily in. And that works well for any level of education. But I'm going to specifically focus on elementary. And so most staff return to school in late August. And so you can respectfully ask, in order to set my child up for success in your school, I would like to organize a tour and a meeting of the teachers before the school year starts. And I have not found much pushback with that. And when I've recommended it to other parents, they've generally had good experiences. I'm sure that there's stories out there that aren't, but in general, I've experienced receptivity around that. And so once you go to the school, you do your tour. I have had the good fortune of having staff who will take pictures of different things so that my child could review it over the rest of the summer and have something to refer to. And we can use it as a way to make them feel more comfortable with the school environment. And then going into the classroom and learning about how the classroom is structured, meeting that teacher so that it's not a brand new adult that they're meeting on day one. They've at least met that person and now have a picture of them. But at the end of that meeting, I would be asking for a follow-up meeting with the primary school team, which is usually the classroom teacher, the special education resource teacher, and either the principal or vice principal, and sometimes there's other people involved. But basically having a school team meeting, and that can be over Zoom. It doesn't have to be in person if that's going to be hard for the school team. But that's where you want to have a discussion around what your child needs to succeed. And so, again, I apologize for being long-winded, but none of these situations are a one and done or there's an easy answer. It is complex. And so we do need to come at it in a multi-pronged way. So for this meeting, the school meeting at the beginning of the school year, the purpose is for you to communicate what you know about your child, what their strengths are, what their challenges are, what's working at home. And then you want to communicate, you want to ask them, based on my child's needs, and you want to acknowledge the school's challenges, and based on the limitations that your school is facing, how will you be supporting my child well? And in that way, you're making it clear that I know you have limitations. I also know that legally my child is entitled to certain supports within this school system. And so I want to partner with you to make sure my child gets what they need, even though you have limitations. So that's where we start. And then if that's not enough, or you're noticing that as the school year progresses that it's not meeting your child's needs, you go back and you clarify, you check in, you find out. So I've noticed blah, 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 and I'm just wondering what the next steps are to correct this. So you want to give them a chance. And then if that's not making a difference, or it's not moving fast enough, and we have to be careful with how we define fast enough, but we don't want to be waiting until January to get the right supports in place for children. Unfortunately, that's what I see happen. And that's why I'm recommending that you start in August. And if you really have enough time, to start at the end of the last school year to put a plan in place for the next school year. And it's sad because how many parents are going to know that? So you usually don't learn that until you've gone through a few school years and you're like, holy crap. Anyway, all that to say, if at the school level you're not seeing the support you need, and you've started with the teacher, you've talked to the vice principal and principal, then you go outside of the school, and there is like a ladder of people that you can talk to. One second, let me just see if I have. Well, what I wrote down is that you keep moving up the chain of command within the school system, communicating your needs, communicating what the school has tried to do, and communicating where there's still gaps. And I like to put it in an email, and I like to send it out to all of the people involved so that there's complete transparency, that I see you, what you have tried to do, but this is what is still a gap for my child. And this is what you told me you would be able to do. I didn't find that satisfactory. And so that's why I'm bringing it to this next person, which might be the superintendent. And right now I'm blanking on the names, the other titles, but it's very clear on the school website who the different people are that you can reach out to for support in succession.
So you said a lot about how parents can support kids, and it seems like it will take a lot of time and research and effort ongoing. So I'm sure there are parents out there who are struggling with doing all these things and doing it well. What would you say to them about being gentle with themselves as they move through it and are struggling to get this done? Because I imagine that as a parent, feeling like you're not doing enough for your child can be really frustrating and painful, especially if you don't see things shifting quickly. So what would you say to somebody who's dealing with that reality at this moment?
So my favorite tool that I use for myself and I teach to the parents I work with is, first, you need to define what 10 out of 10 looks like for a specific area that you're working on with your child. And I guess a step before that is to pick one area at a time. And it's not going to feel satisfying. It's going to feel like all of these areas need to be addressed, and they do. It's just that you're one person and you can't do it all. and your child will benefit more from a happy parent than a parent who is burnt out. And so, keeping that in mind, you pick one area that you feel you're able to work with, and an area that has the potential to have the broadest positive impact. So that's number one, I should say. And then number two is then whatever that area is, you define what 10 out of 10 looks like realistically. And then you define, where's my child now? And then you pick a point on that scale that's maybe one or two steps above. So a concrete example of this, let's say my child does not like to sit in a circle, or really struggles to even sit at the table for to eat. So I'm going to define, maybe by asking the classroom teacher, um, how long are children expected to sit at the carpet? And let's say the classroom teacher says 10 minutes, and my child can barely sit for a minute. So then if 10 out of 10 is 10 minutes, and my child can barely sit for 1 minute, then it doesn't make sense for me to be focused on getting my child to sit for 10 minutes right out the gate. What I want to do is figure out what helps my child to sit for 2 minutes, and what can they do, because they might need a sensory break after that. What can they do to re-regulate themselves so that they can come back to the circle and sit? So when we break it down, it makes it more doable and more reasonable, and it's less stress on us. And we have to always keep in mind that it's not all up to us and our child. The system has to meet us more than halfway as well, because they're the professionals, and they should not be expecting our child to be performing at this one level that all children are expected to perform at, because that's another form of imposing colonization values on the whole society, and that's not fair. Not all kids need to measure up to that or can. And so let's set more realistic goals for both ourselves, and the school professionals need to do the same, and provide supports that work for that child's needs, not just for the teacher's needs.
Based on your experience as a mother with a child on the spectrum, and also as a professional who works with lots of families living with autism, what is one thing you really, really wish that school systems, teachers, administrators would do better for children on the spectrum and their families?
What I wish is that the school systems would have a core group of teachers that want to work with children with differences. And for those core teachers, that they actually provide them with ongoing education that's up to date. And they also provide the support staff and support tools to implement the evidence-based strategies. That's what I wish was in place. A more comprehensive support plan for the teachers who actually want to work with this population, and reliable support that those teachers can lean on in order to support our children more effectively.
Anything else you really love to add before we go?
I would like to add that you want to make sure whatever early intervention program that you choose or that you access for your child, it's looking at 4 areas. It's looking at foundation skills for behavioral success in school. And what that means is that your child is able to listen to other adults, or the other adults have tools to help that child listen, or gain those listening skills and follow through skills. You also want to make sure the program has the foundational emotional support that that child needs to be successful in junior and senior kindergarten. And so that means that they're learning basic skills around identifying emotions in themselves and noticing it in others, being able to read super simple nonverbal cues of emotion, very, very simple ways, because a lot of kids on the spectrum will misread those things, and people tend to misread their nonverbal signs. And so it's information that needs to go both ways. And then the other two are social foundational skills and academic. So with social, you want to make sure that the program actually teaches the child um, how to play with others and how to interact with others. Not that they need to do that all the time, but when it's appropriate and when it makes sense, that they have some basic skills to make friends, because that's part of what makes the school experience such a success. And then finally, academically, a lot of kids on the spectrum might have gross motor needs or fine motor needs, and that can affect their how they do some of the things academically, especially in junior kindergarten and kindergarten, where there's a lot of cut and paste. And those fine motor skills might need some development and some practice. And so you want to make sure that the early intervention program takes that into account. So those four areas: behavioral, emotional, social, and academic.
All right, Karyn, thank you so much for talking to us today. You've shared so much information, as you always do. I love it. And I'm sure my audience does as well. I don't know why you're laughing, because I meant that seriously. Well, I'm definitely going to try and ask you to come back again, maybe in the future, to talk about something else. But please know that we appreciate you, and it was great having you today. And thank you again for coming. Bye.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, I really admire the work that you're doing in the Black community. Thank you so much for what you bring to the table.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, we're at the end of today's show. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I really hope that you enjoyed today's podcast and you learned some information that you can use or pass on to somebody you think could be helped by the information that was shared here today. And know that I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon. Till then, take care. Bye.